All right, so we're going to see how this goes. This could be very interesting. Yes, hello. Oh, there we go. All right, so we have someone in attendance. So therefore, I'm going to get things started. Hi, I'm Lehman Kessler, and this is my very first lecture for the Forever Museum Discord channel. I am going to be talking today about improvising and impersonating other people. I have for over a decade been impersonating and acting as H.P. Lovecraft over on my Ask Lovecraft web series, where I took questions as Lovecraft, was part of. Oh, hello. Oh, and now the event is starting. Oh, okay, there we go. Oh, hello. Um, Yay, Professor Zeke is here. I'm going to have my attention a little bit divided because I've got the Forever Museum over on this camera, and I've got TikTok over here. This is I'm doing a TikTok live in order to record this and have a chance for folks to kind of know about the Forever Museum and what's going on over there. And so, yeah, I'm going to be mostly talking to folks over here in the Discord channel. So if you're interested in it, you can go follow the uh, uh, Tyson, the Forever NPC, over on TikTok, and he's got tons of links to the Forever Museum. But thank you to everyone who is attending, whether you are here on the Discord or over here on TikTok. Like I said, I'm going to be have my attention a little bit split between folks, with a bit more emphasis on the Discord because that is where the sort of the home for this whole situation is. So in person, how to do essentially impersonations, I think is something that a lot of folks are interested in. A lot of folks do them. And I'm going to talk a bit about how we do them professionally and how we kind of engage with them professionally. Because I think there's a lot of notions about, what it means to be an impersonator, to imitate someone. We have ideas of sort of celebrity impersonators, or folks who do impersonations of different media types through cosplay, historical reenactment. There's just a lot of different avenues and areas that impersonation, comes into play. And because I'm a giant Dungeons and Dragons nerd, I'm going to have sort of two different models that I'm going to use to help kind of explain at least how I approach impersonation and imitation. The first is the simulacrum. Simulacrum is like the perfect recreation of someone, of a yeah, of whoever you're trying to imitate, right? And this is what I think a lot of us believe is what impersonation looks like, right? Is the actually like fully becoming someone else, being able to fool an audience into thinking that you are this person, whether it's like presidential impersonators, the big famous George W. Bush impersonator that was on the circuit for a good long while, or folks who are just able to do just like pitch perfect vocal recreations of celebrities, politicians, things like that. I follow a lot of folks here on TikTok who do some amazing voice acting, and I also follow folks who do amazing like makeup work, so they can like recreate celebrities. One of my uh, favorite folks I follow on TikTok is able to look exactly like Gene Wilder when she puts on makeup, and it's a beautiful thing. And the simulacrum or simulacrumist, if we want to make everything into an ist, trying to recreate it. But then there's the other model, and there'll be overlap. These are not in separate spheres, but there's the homunculus, and the homunculus doesn't always look like what's happening, what you're trying to recreate, what you're trying to become, but it captures some essence of it. Now, sometimes it does. Sometimes I think there are folks who manage to create something that both looks like what it's trying to imitate and sounds like what it's trying to imitate, and also has this kind of homuncular feel. Uh, but a homunculus again doesn't necessarily have to perfectly simulate, recreate what it is we're talking about. And so, to help kind of explain this and to give you a kind of a framework, I want to talk about the difference between the John Adams miniseries with Paul Giamatti and Laura Linney, the musical 1776, and the musical Hamilton. Because all three of these are depicting similar events, similar people, but they are doing so in very different ways. They are becoming, they have very different goals and what they're trying to depict and how they're trying to depict it. and they also all do it very successfully. Like people obviously can prefer Hamilton to 1776 or prefer John Adams to Hamilton, but I think generally speaking, it can be understood that all three of them are doing a fantastic job of achieving their goals, of presenting this time period, presenting these characters. Now, John Adams, I think, is very much in the simulacrum mode, right? They have the costuming, they have the sets are immaculate. As the characters age, like their teeth are rotting. Like Laura Linney by the end of that series is like crunching her way through all of her lines. It's fantastic. It's very much trying to create a sense of verisimilitude, which I think is a useful word when we're talking about doing impersonations, when we're talking about trying to become someone else. And it's very good. Now, 1776 is a musical, so already it's ditching some sense of reality. Like you are going into it understanding that this is not meant to like fool you into thinking you've got this kind of glimpse into the past, but the music helps to explain what's happening with the history. It gives you a sense of what's happening with the characters' sort of internal mindset. Sometimes, they're literally taking letters. Same thing with Hamilton. They're taking the actual writings and setting those to music. But it is still, like for the most part, unless you've got a very out there production, like it's presenting these characters very traditionally as they're sort of understood in popular culture or popular history, what have you. Then we have Hamilton, which, to some degree is the most successful of all three of these. And it is not really trying to fool you into thinking this a recreation of what you're seeing. It is incredibly stylized from the language to how they're talking to this, the rhythms, everything is its own thing. And yet, as I said, it's very successful. And for a lot of people, I think their understanding of who Alexander Hamilton is going to be much more informed by Lin-Manuel Miranda than it is the John Adams miniseries, which had Alexander Hamilton's a character in that. Like he's like running around being kind of like oily and obnoxious. Uh, but it does not capture the imagination in the exact same way that Miranda does. And so, when we're talking about portraying people, whether we're talking about, trying to do the perfect De Niro or trying to, recreate Mark Twain, I think it's helpful to keep in mind sort of what your goals are. Like, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to, find that mirror image, truly recreate it, which can be limited by physicality, can be limited by, what your how your vocal cords are shaped, trying to fully capture, how someone sounds, there's limitations. There's things you can train. There's ways that you can train your body, train your voice, train your face, to capture certain nuances. But I think for a lot of us, thinking of things in terms of the homunculus, thinking of trying to capture what is genuinely true and at the essence of the character is really important. And it's also really important because you are the medium, right? Like the character, the person you're trying to depict is not like, that's maybe the goal and that may be sort of the template that you are working towards. But like your instrument, what you're being able to like actually use to recreate that is your own sense of self, your own person, your own body. And that is something you have a lot of, you have some control over in terms of like what, you're able to train yourself to do. But it's just your medium, right? Like, you are the art form that you're creating. And so I'm going to pull out my Uta Hagen here because I think she has a lot of really important ideas about acting in general. But when it comes to talking about, how we portray and who we portray, I think she cuts to some really important matters. And that's that you have to understand yourself. You have to have a sense of self. Where do we begin? First, you must learn to know who you are. You must find your own sense of identity, enlarge this sense of self, and learn to see how that knowledge can be put to use in the characters you will portray on stage. You have a tendency to copy what we have seen others do on stage rather than to search within your own life experience to bring forth a new human onto the stage. And I think that's what's really important. You are creating something. Even if you are creating a simulacrum, even if you are creating like that mirror image, it's still you that's doing it. It is your talent, it is your creativity, it is your energy that is breathing life into this thing, right? There is no just objective Robert De Niro like mold that you have to like achieve. Like you are able to find what Robert De Niro means to you. And I keep going to Robert De Niro because he's someone that I think a lot of folks see imitated, or Christopher Walken, right? Like but even long before I did Lovecraft, on my YouTube channel, you go way, 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 way back. They may be unlisted, but I think you can still find them. I did walk-in theater, which was me like reading books as Christopher Walken and just being terrible. Um, and it was fun. Like it was ridiculous. And it was based on, working at a bookstore and just, entertaining my colleagues by picking up romance novels and be like, Raoul saw Olivia behind the shed and his passion began to bloom, and now my like that imitation right there isn't even an imitation of Christopher Walken. That's like an imitation of like other people's imitations of Christopher Walken, right? What Uta Hagen talks about, like, we often are just repeating what we see other folks do. But it was fun. And like I would, entertain bored bookstore workers for a very long time by, playing that up and hamming that up. And so, again, I was not trying to like fully become Christopher Walken in that moment. I was trying to capture like, those little mannerisms, those little like cliche kind of caricatures and have fun with that. And I think that's key, right? I'm not trying to every performance is unique, right? You're not trying to necessarily, give 100% to every single type of performance. So it's very important when you're setting out to do imitations and impersonations that you understand, a, what's my goal, like what amount of energy am I putting into this, and who is my audience for this. More cowbell mayor. That's right. My favorite thing to imitate of Chris Walken like is Max Schreck in Batman Returns. Santa Claus, no, I'm just some schmuck who got lucky, and sue me if I want to get a little back. Like that's the Christopher Walken I love, or Chris Walken in the oh gosh darn it, why am I completely blanking on that? The Prophecy movies, right? You got that little divot above your lip before you were born, like whispered a secret, and I went shh. Like those are sort of those moments, right? Like you're not trying to encapsulate the entire life, the entire career of, someone when you are portraying them. You're trying to find the things that matter to you, right? Like you need to find, again, have that sense of self, have that sense of what appeals, what like, is impacts you. And this is what is going to now get us to Lovecraft, right? Lovecraft was and still remains the person I had spent the most time inhabiting the flesh mask and skin suit of. And I it started off because a friend of mine was going to be writing a play about Lovecraft. He and I had Stephen Neer was interested in doing something about Lovecraft and his relationship with Sonia Green. Lovecraft is infamously known as this anti-Semitic, xenophobic bigot, and yet he somehow managed to attract and marry a Jewish Ukrainian immigrant, Sonia Green. And they were married for not a long time, but enough time. And for the most part, that seems to have been fairly amicable. Um, Although Stephen, of course, found ways to kind of discover tension and play with the tension. And yeah, Stephen asked me to play Lovecraft, and I played him in two different versions of the play, and that was very helpful as an actor because someone else was writing the words for me. I wasn't having to come up with them, and improvise off the top of my dome. So I was able to work with his words and work with his script, which was phenomenal and really dug deep. It dug deep into his letters, it dug deep into his writing, and managed to really get some I think some sort of essential truths about Lovecraft. And it was my job to take those words and like put them into a body. And so, that began the process of trying to figure out, okay, how do I portray Lovecraft? Now, there is no video or audio recording of Lovecraft out there, which is works in my favor because there's nothing anyone can compare it to. So I have photographs. We know what Lovecraft looks like. I don't really look like Lovecraft. Like if I jet out my jaw a little bit, I can, maybe get a little bit of that like patrician jaw business. But aside from the fact that like I'm sort of awkward and very white, there's not a lot of Lovecraft. Now, if I shave and keep my hair very sort of trim, I can maintain the illusion. Um, but yeah, I was, I had sort of very limited ability to recreate him physically, but that was fine. And then there was the voice. And the voice and finding the voice was also a challenge because, again, we didn't have any audio of him, so I had nothing I could go to. I didn't want to do, he's Rhode Island, so like, do I try to figure out like kind of like a New Englandy, Rhode Islandy accent? But a 21st century, Rhode Island accent is not going to be what necessarily a 20th century Rhode Island accent is going to be like. And then, what we did hear about his voice, actually, and I think I did only discover this after I'd done the play, um, is that his voice was very sort of high and reedy. So, if I had been trying to be, the simulacrum, the sort of the perfect, version of Lovecraft, be like, hello, I'm Howard Phillips Lovecraft, and the most darkest nights of the soul are when we are engaged with the reality of truth. Like it probably would not have been particularly pleasant to do on stage for long periods of time. And so I had to come up with, a voice. And, I think I was, thinking in terms of sort of slightly mid-Atlantic. Over time, it definitely shifted. What I did on stage, I think, is not exactly like what I eventually wound up doing for Ask Lovecraft. But there's roots of it, right? So it's somewhat clipped. It's still somewhat here in the back of the throat. So it's not, people think, oh, why is he doing Lovecraft as a British accent? No, that would be like, hello, I'm Howard Phillips Lovecraft. I'm very delighted to talk to you about nightmarish horrors. Yes. It's still very much here. It's very much, that American like growl. And it's again, it became about the face. It became about how I communicated this obsession, these dreams that come to us, but also understanding that like, he wasn't just this monomaniacal force. Like he wasn't just this absolute, like, completely disconnected misanthrope. This was a guy who had a sense of humor about himself. And when I started Ask Lovecraft, I knew his stories, I'd known the script that I was sort of, basing that off of. A bit of Vincent Price, yes, yeah, right. Vincent Price, obviously, I think definitely creeps in. After a while, I realized I was kind of doing a Frasier accent, which again is that kind of cultivated, somewhat New England, I'm listening. Um, but it was something that I could do on stage. I could project it. I could just be like, shouting at Sonia about people don't understand my stories. And again, that's not presumably how he would have actually talked. People don't understand my stories. But I didn't want to do that voice because that was going to hurt me. Interesting little side note when it comes to sort of historic figures and historic impersonations. This connects to Daniel Day-Lewis, who's very famous for portraying Abraham Lincoln. Um, a lot of like politicians, generals, performers of the pre-electronic era probably had really high-pitched, reedy voices. And that's because when you don't have electronic amplification, a big sort of deep basso profundo is not really going to carry. It sounds really good. And it sounds, when you're up close and you can have it amplified, it can be really impressive and just, we shall meet them on the shores. But if you are like in a field, being able to be like, attack! Like, think Chris Latta, Cobra Commander, retreat! Like, that's what's going to carry, and that's what folks are going to be able to hear for long distances. So, like, yeah, for a long time, a kind of piping voice was considered the, like, the voice of a leader. And so there you go. Now, okay, I've got Brian Blessed being brought out here. Brian Blessed absolutely is just a monster of a man, and yes, is able to shout his way across a stage and screen, and does a fantastic job. Um, so now I'm just sorry. Now I'm like, oh, I want to go back and watch. I want to go back and watch I Claudius. My blessed is someone I also enjoy doing from time to time because he's just so delightful and he's so this is someone who is a Gungan. It's fun being Brian Blessed. Oh yeah, well, yeah, news announcers from the 1920s, right? Coming up, I think that was what folks sort of associated with with being able to project and being able to put out there. And again, with stage, like, I was not necessarily, I was not Mike, so I couldn't do like I'm Howard Phillips Lovecraft. I can bring you in hot or I can bring you in cold. I still had to have something that I could, yes, Pedro Pascal's H.P. Lovecraft coming soon to HBO. Um, Being able to, project on a stage. And then as I started doing my show, my web series, that was inside. That was, I couldn't, I didn't need to like shout to get to the camera. I was able to kind of, calm it down a little bit. And, and yeah, that's eventually how, the voice changed and adjusted based on the medium, based on what I needed it for. at no point was I like, oh, it's not quite Lovecraft enough. Like I was like, I got to a point where I was like, you know what, I can work with this. The homunculus, like I smushed that bit of Lovecraft into the little clay golem, and the homunculus was formed. And then, as I began to do, it was interesting, right? Because I took Ask Lovecraft, which was an improvised show, and it was I wouldn't even say moderately scripted. For to do that show, I would take letters, I would sort of read them and kind of think about hitting a few different beats, and then I would just get in front of my camera and perform. And improvising as a character is a completely whole other thing, and it's a lot of fun. Like it's a lot of fun, but it's a huge challenge because you are having to act as this character, act as this homunculus, in the moment. I think that's why people like celebrity impersonators, and they like sort of shows where celebrity impersonators are forced to kind of interact with people, because they want to see that interaction happening in real time, and see those kind of calculations happening in real time. And I got to do that for after as Lovecraft began to get bigger and bigger, and I began to be invited out to do conventions and perform live. We had to come up with a show that worked for a live audience, and a huge big part of that was being able to answer questions and interact with folks in the moment. And in that regard, my Lovecraft homunculus became even like less real because it had to be very elastic. I had to be able to respond to like serious questions, silly questions, questions about racism. Like I had to really be able to move and duck and weave, and I could get really like quiet and serious and touch on things that mattered, or I could make really broad jokes that were just all over the place. And it was a lot of fun, and I got a ton of positive feedback for doing that. And so yes, again, you have to think about what is your goal when you are trying to, when you're trying to impersonate, when you're trying to create something. Again, think about, are you trying to create a simulacrum? Are you trying to just create a homunculus? And then what kind of homunculus do you want? Do you want that kind of broad caricature? Do you want that kind of, sort of intimate and have a bit of, that verisimilitude? Here in Ohio, there's this local group that gets together, and they do kind of an evening with some sort of historical figure, an evening with Mary Todd Lincoln, or an evening with well, this is the hometown of Paul Lynde, so Paul Lynde impersonators are a dime a dozen around here. And they're always a lot of fun, and they're very, very different because people either do very scripted stuff or do improvised, or they come as musicians and perform as those musicians. And I've done it 3 times now. I did it once as Lovecraft. I had like 5 people come out who were very confused. I think there was one person whose husband knew who Lovecraft was, but couldn't make it. So like she just had her phone up, like letting him see me from afar. Otherwise, just a lot of blank stares as I got into my bit. And then the second time, my most successful, I did Carl Sagan. Now, I started doing Carl Sagan because I was in a Toronto Fringe play. The Toronto has a big summertime independent theater festival called the Toronto Fringe, and I've done it a bunch of times. And one of the times, it was this sort of strange, broad comedy, um, and there was a bunch of side characters that I was pretty much required to play because I was sort of the junior actor. And the director was like, "Why don't you do this character as Carl Sagan?" I was like, "Sure." And I did, and I had a fun wig and turtleneck, and enjoyed that. And then you could see me pulling off Carl Sagan. I debated getting my Carl Sagan coat for this, and I decided instead to go for my jaunty PH coat. And and so I really like doing that. And then when I started Ask Lovecraft, when I started doing Ask Lovecraft, I enjoyed being Lovecraft, but like very quickly realized, okay, I'm doing 3 episodes a week, which is a lot. Like I'm churning out a lot of content. They're short, like, they're 2 to 3 minute episodes. It's not like a big, half an hour long monologue. But it was a regular churn of being Lovecraft and finding things to do with Lovecraft. And eventually I was like, okay, I want to do something else. And I started having Lehman Kessler show up as a character, which was fun, playing myself as like a hapless producer. If you want an acting challenge, impersonate yourself and like see like what elements of yourself do you like highlight and caricaturize and play with. And it's I think a very interesting lesson uh, in acting, right? But also probably useful for therapy as well. So I had Lehman Kessler. I then had H.P. Lovecraft's evil twin, P.H. Lovecraft, which is where this coat I eventually started to wear was because I needed something that was the opposite of Lovecraft, which was bright and sort of very louche. I decided he was Southern for some reason. He was like, "Well, hello there, I'm P.H. Lovecraft, the best Lovecraft." And that was a lot of fun. And then for reasons that I can't begin to explain, Carl Sagan started appearing on the show. I had Lovecraft interview Carl Sagan, and I had love Carl Sagan. I think one of my episodes, you can go hunt it down, is just Carl Sagan reading the entirety of the story Nyarlathotep. I do have an episode I think just called "Why is Carl Sagan on this show?" And yeah, just Sagan became a regular part of Ask Lovecraft and the Ask Lovecraft canon. And so cosmic horror meets the cosmos precisely, and so yeah, so when I was asked to come back and do this, an evening with it's a Chautauqua series, so it's based on sort of the New York Chautauquas. But it was yeah, there was this evening with historical people. I was like, well, I could do how about Carl Sagan? I could do Carl Sagan. And that was fantastic. We had a huge crowd out for that. People genuinely were interested in Carl Sagan, remembering him from PBS. And that one was more scripted. I really sort of prepared a bit. It was memorized and whatnot, but I had, a kind of a full lecture as Sagan based on his writings, based on Cosmos. And then I got into the Q&A for that. And that became very interesting because I'm in rural Ohio, very conservative part of Ohio. And so, I touched very briefly on like aspects of like religion and whatnot. And Sagan was a very like self-avowed sort of agnostic. Um, and people were like, wait a minute, are you saying like you don't believe in Jesus? And so having to like talk about like Sagan's like religiosity, like in character, it was a trip. It was a lot of fun. And then like, other people would ask specific questions about Sagan's kids who I did not bother learning about. And I'm like, I'm sure they're fine wherever they are. Sagan is a ton of fun. Sagan's like, now here's what we're talking about with impersonations, finding the vocal range, I don't look like Carl Sagan. I don't have like the massive eyebrows. If I cared more about like, makeup and hair and things like that, I could like try to recreate it. I would do Sagan when I hadn't had a haircut for a long time. Like when I was thinking about getting a haircut, that's usually when because to look like Lovecraft a little bit, I couldn't be super poofy. Whereas for Sagan, poofiness absolutely works. And um, you know, uh, and then the turtleneck does a lot of heavy lifting with Sagan. But it's not just about finding the buzzes and the billions. Everyone does the billions. You also have to have the human. It's about the human experience. He turned the like H's into Y's a lot of the times. And again, it's the homunculus. It's taking just like pinching off a little bit of Sagan's soul and like squishing it into the clay and forming it and rolling it together. And then yeah, you come up with human and Sagan and billions. It also helps that like Sagan has just genuinely said bonkers things. Like I was trying to on the Lovecraft, in Lovecraft, I was trying to like play him up as like, oh, Sagan, he's always on drugs and he's so wacky. But then like as I'm looking up actual things about Sagan's biography, and it's like, I was making love to my wife in the shower after taking copious amounts of marijuana, and I began to write on the shower walls a mathematical expression for how racism can be eradicated. I'm like, how do I I can't make fun of that. Like I can't like I can't make that more. Like Sagan is like sort of reaches a level of absolute just wildness. And yeah, I love doing the Sagan. That was a ton of fun. That was one of my most like rewarding experiences. It was fun to prep for. It was fun to just do and be in that mode. To be able to like communicate with folks as that character. And now I'm going to talk about my third and probably like most painful and difficult one of these. So I'd had like sort of a bit of a whiff with Lovecraft, but like I was used to doing Lovecraft, and I'd done Lovecraft for like church groups before because I would get invited to weird things. And so I was used to like Lovecraft being kind of hit or miss. Sagan absolutely knocked it out of the park. I was feeling good. And they're like, all right, we'd like you to come back. I'm like, all right, who do I want to be? What could I do? I know I'm going to do Peter Sellers. I like love Peter Sellers movies. Like I'll be able to, like I've been doing like Doctor Strangelove is probably like one of the first things I ever impersonated. Um, like as a kid, which should tell you something about like my childhood that like I was watching a lot of Doctor Strangelove as a kid. And I was just like, yeah, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna be able to do Pink Panther, but I'm also gonna be able to talk about like Peter Sellers must have like a really cool life that I could like get into. And I began to research Peter Sellers and discovered that like there's no there there. Like the reason why Peter Sellers is such a kind of compelling actor and like fascinating person to watch is like he was a void. Like you read about his personal life, you read about his like interpersonal relationships and like just the way he sort of like consumed people around him and kept people away and just like it was genuinely difficult to find Peter Sellers and to find a way to impersonate Peter Sellers. Also, I kind of came to hate Peter Sellers. Um and so yeah, it was a challenge, right? Like, because people know his characters. I know his characters, right? But if I were to ask, who is Peter Sellers? Jeffrey Rush did like an HBO uh, movie about Sellers, and I think similarly, you see him like presenting this absolute mess of addictions and just I don't know. It's just it's difficult. It's difficult to watch and very difficult to perform, but I found it. I found the through line. And, again, my goal was not necessarily to recreate, Peter Sellers on stage. Again, I was able to do the impressions that everyone was like excited to see, but I was able to also, kind of tell the story of Sellers, which is a ghost story. Peter Sellers, he had, had this weird tragic life and but also had ridiculous amounts of success and was this sort of beloved person while again pushing everyone away, being like really like kind of maniacally obsessed with like a cult and like just I don't know, it's hard to literally for me to talk about it right now. But what became really powerful was as I was doing this research, as I was finding out what I could about Peter Sellers, um, was when I discovered that Peter Sellers isn't his actual name. Um, Peter Sellers was real name was Richard Henry Sellers. Peter Sellers was the name of his brother who died in infancy. And so, like, thinking about what it must be like to go through life under the name of your lost brother and to like his story is a ghost story. And so suddenly when I realized, oh, I don't need to tell like I don't need to be Peter Sellers and necessarily like, tell the story of like his acting career. I need to tell a ghost story about someone so haunted, someone like so self-destructive who does literally like get lost inside of these roles. And in so doing, I had a compelling evening. Now it was hard and it was very difficult, and I don't think I would ever do Peter Sellers again. um, but that's what it took. That was the homunculus. The homunculus was in fact a ghost, and it was a huge challenge. And I'm glad I kind of got through it. But yeah, that's like this is the challenge of trying to figure out what precisely do you want to do when impersonating and when you are portraying someone. And finding out, if I had just tried to go for the simulacrum, if I had just tried to recreate Peter Sellers, I think I just like would have refused. I think I just would have walked away because I'm like, no, I can't inhabit this for love or money. And so yeah. Um so that's kind of my broad career as far as my experience with impersonations. Another thing I had a lot of fun with, there was an improv show in Toronto called Perfect Match, and what the premise of that was, they had a bunch of different actors, a bunch of different comedians and improvisers, and they would have a character, and you would come forward and you do like a little like 1 minute like here's who I am. And I did Lovecraft once, I did Sagan once, I did Paul Land. That was when they were in a bind and needed a last minute guest, and so I was able to jump in with my Lent. And then they would randomly pair up folks together. So I did like H.P. Lovecraft and like a drill instructor, and we were both like competing for an elementary school job or something. It was very strange, but a lot of fun. I did Carl Sagan and the Little Mermaid. So Sagan like being presented with this fish-like abomination. Um, Definitely a lot of fun. But Paul Lynde was the best because it was Paul Lynde paired with Colonel Saul Tigh from Battlestar Galactica. And so, interrogating Paul Lynde to see if he's Cylon, getting to make the joke, oh, I don't think I'm a flesh job, but I've certainly had a few, if you know what I mean. That was a lot of fun. And you saw just this very broad range of folks, trying to very much inhabit the character, or again, doing a kind of like a broad caricature. And I think if there's going to be, this is a lecture, right? So I get to give homework. If I can give homework to folks, if I can inspire you to do anything, if you're interested in doing impersonations, if you're interested in doing like improvisational acting, I'd love you to go check out Paul F. Tompkins' the Dead Authors Society podcast. This was a live stage show they did in LA, and they did a whole podcast series which is still available. The show's sadly not running anymore, but Paul F. Tompkins as H.G. Wells was going around in his time machine, grabbing authors and writers and interviewing them. And they're all being portrayed by comedians and actors, and it was all done for charity. It's a fantastic, fantastic program. You know, Paula Tompkins H.G. Wells is H.G. Wells in my brain forever and ever. He was so Paula Tompkins is an amazing interviewer. If you ever just see him interviewing folks not even out of, in character, but as himself, I think he is just a master class in how to get information out of folks and to create a really compelling conversation. When he's doing it as H.G. Wells and then getting really fussy and over the top whenever anyone mentions Jules Verne, chef's kiss. But the range of the kind of performances you can see people give and the range of compelling performances, they are so different. How different actors approach the job of portray this person from history. I think Andy Richter did Emily Dickinson and did a really sweet job, just being Emily Dickinson and talking about, oh, I'm just gonna go home and think about death for a while. There's oh man, Andy Daly did, I think, two different folks. He did the Marquis de Sade, which was a ton of fun, but he did a two-parter because it was so amazing they had to come back. He did L. Ron Hubbard, and his L. Ron Hubbard was chilling and hilarious and charming and terrifying, and it's just I don't know how much. I assume he had to do a fair amount of research. Andy Daly is a hilarious impersonator and a hilarious comedian, but the amount of work that he put into it and his ability to capture the glib charm of L. Ron Hubbard and the dangerous charm of L. Ron Hubbard it was amazing. Again, if you could go and find the two-parter, they had to do two parts because the conversation was so just powerful and going back and forth and engaging that they didn't even get to Scientology by the time the first show was over, and they had to come back so they could at least touch on Scientology. But it's phenomenal. He captured, again, if you put his interview next to actual footage of L. Ron Hubbard, would they look exactly alike? Probably not. But he captured what is at the kind of chilling the heart of our understanding of Hubbard and our understanding of Scientology and why so many people are trapped in it. It's fantastic. Another one that's amazing, and I think there is video of this one because you need to see the costume. Because yeah, some folks would go all out for costumes. Some folks would just show up in a t-shirt. But they interview Ayn Rand, and it's John Hodgman as Ayn Rand, and John Hodgman right as he was going into his mustache phase as Ayn Rand, in this amazing dress with a dollar sign brooch, and he based he based his performance on a 1970s or early 1980s interview with Phil Donahue that Ayn Rand gave. And it's beautiful. It's completely insulting and reductive, and I'm sure if you are a true objectivist, you would have lots of that's not fair. But as far as a performance goes, it is so phenomenal and so much fun, and I really recommend it. John Hodgman also helped put together and produce what is maybe one of the most meta impersonations. So I'm going to end my sort of prepared bit by talking about what I think is one of the most famous impersonators, and that's Hal Holbrook. And Hal Holbrook became famous for years for doing Mark Twain. And he had a very, very like just charming Mark Twain. Like, he captured so much of like what people, again, what people think of when they think of Twain, which is a very different thing from who Twain is, right? Go back to like how history is going to remember Alexander Hamilton, based on Miranda's homunculus. And so, Hal Holbrook's, version of Twain, like, just was so well known, so like, imitated in lots of, by itself. Paul F. Tompkins got his friend Dana Gould to dress up as Dr. Zaius as Hal Holbrook as Mark Twain. This like parfait of impersonations. And that you can find on YouTube. And that like that's a homunculus. Like, what is this thing I am that you are like? What is this thing? Like this is not like, you look at that, you look at a picture of Mark Twain. These are not like in any way the same thing, and yet there is something so magical. There is something so wondrous and weird, and that's what performance is, right? Like that. It's about like creating a new life. It is about creating something that is wonderful and strange and adding to the sense of weirdness that is out there in the world. And yeah, that's what that's what impersonation can do, right? It is not simply let me recreate this thing that already exists. Like you can do that. Like you can have a lot of fun as a party trick. You can have a lot of fun, playing with with different people and showing off like your range and your ability to capture folk. But I argue if you're not also creating a performance, if there's not a little bit of that impish homunculus in that performance, then sure, you can create something fun, but to have something truly meaningful, I think it has to have that bit of yourself as well. So there you go. That is impersonations and imitations, a sort of crash course discussion by Ohio's most famous H.P. Lovecraft impersonator. Thank you all for being part of this, and thank you all from TikTok for watching. Hopefully, we'll find a way to get this uploaded and maybe have a copy of this over at the Forever Museum. But I wanted to leave some time if there are questions about what it's like to perform as Lovecraft or Sagan or how anything else. I'm happy to talk about it. I will say one of my favorite things I've got to do as H.P. Lovecraft is talk to George R. R. Martin about his Call of Cthulhu characters. And yes, you can find footage of me being interviewed or interviewing George R. R. Martin and asking questions over at asklovecraft.com. That was career high for me. So anyway, are there questions? Otherwise, I can let folks leave class early. And thank you to all the folks who hopped on TikTok Live. I know it was a little bit unannounced, but there you go. I hope folks have been enjoying it. Oh, we got someone. Tyson's typing. This is the nice thing about Discord is I can before I shut off, I can see that someone's in the midst of getting some stuff out there. And for folks who are on TikTok Live, I do recommend going over to find the Forever Museum. You can find links. I think I've got some over on Twitter. It's a fantastic server. There's a lot of really amazing folks talking about everything from cooking to microbiology to the paleontology to weaponsmithing, cosplay. They do some amazing stuff over there, and a lot of folks that you can learn from and support as well. Oh, that was my absolute pleasure. I'm always happy to talk about myself and my shenanigans. So, yes, that is never a problem for me. Ooh, how much research should folks go into impersonating a person for like a real life interaction, like sort of like an improvised situation. I think it really goes back to depend on what it is you're hoping to accomplish with it, right? Like, you know, knowing anything about a character is very useful, and knowing, sort of broad things that other your audience will know about the person, and then maybe just like a little bit more, right? So you can surprise them, right? Like the Peter Sellers bit, I think is a huge part of that, right? Like learning about his brother, learning about his actual name, like, and being able to save that to pop at the end of the show, uh, was big. That's not something that everyone knows about Sellers. And it was sort of key to my kind of my it was my prestige, right? The thing I sort of was able to put out there. Um, but again, it's about sort of understanding the expectations of your audience and kind of getting a sense of what they're wanting to do, what they're there for, what they're interested in. With Lovecraft, I'm very lucky because Lovecraft, you know, has this just mountain of letters and this mountain of correspondence that's been saved and it's been published. That was really when my show began to kind of turn around and click in my head, was when I discovered his letters and began to like get his sense of self from that, separate from his stories, because they're actually very different people. If you just know Lovecraft from his stories, I think you come away with this like idea of someone who's like cringing at shadows. And it it speaks to a lot of what people think of with Lovecraft, right? They think, oh, like Lovecraft was sort of an agoraphobe and he hated going outside and he hated being around people, and he just like hid in his little closet writing about monsters. And that's not true at all. Like Lovecraft loved to travel. He like spent tons of times in coffee shops arguing like about philosophy and poetry with a very broad circle of friends. He had an immense network of friends. Part of the reason why like Lovecraft is a thing is because he had such a social network that he nourished and like cultivated. He was constantly writing letters back and forth with like folks and introducing them to other artists and writers. Like, you know, he was nourishing artists around him. And because of that, when he died, those writers and artists like banded together to create Arkham House and get his stuff published and like get his stuff out into the world. And part of that may have been mercenary and recognizing, hey, there's a market for this guy. And, there's a lot of conversations about kind of his immediate predecessors and how, the fight over his legacy and the fight over his estate and his works. But nevertheless, like none of that would be there if he had not gone out of his way to create those friendships and create those relationships. And so being aware of that is very, very useful for portraying this character, right? And understanding that he had a sense of humor. Like I think a lot of people would think of Lovecraft as sort of humorless and dry, and just writing about people getting driven mad by seeing a Shoggoth. When the dude wrote Sweet Ermengarde, which was like a send up of like frivolous romance stories, and it's hilarious. Like it's arch and catty. And Lovecraft could be very catty in his letters, which is not, I think, something people think about when they think about Lovecraft. So yeah, if you want to have that verisimilitude and you want to have that kind of that reality, doing the research is incredibly important for that. And incredibly important for kind of getting at like what is at the core of someone. And the more you know about someone, the more details you know about them. I think it's absolutely valid. I think it's helpful to know that Carl Sagan was part of a project to look at whether it made sense to nuke the moon. You can look that up. That's a real thing. Carl Sagan, I think he advised against it. I think he was part of the team that said maybe we don't nuke the moon, but he was part of the conversation. And I think that colors colors our perception of Sagan when we know that. So, again, do I learn everyone's like names of their grandparents and how old they were when they graduated high school? It's useful to like it's useful to know that Lovecraft tried to almost got into the army and almost served in World War I and then was sort of dragged out of it by his mom. Like, so it's useful to know those sort of historical details as far as kind of how they how they color someone's and people's perceptions of them. Uh, but I know that the one name I'll always remember of Lovecraft's life is Whipple Van Buren Phillips, which is his grandfather's name. And I feel like if you know that Lovecraft's like sort of massive influential patriarch was called Whipple Van Buren, like I don't know, that just says a lot about the dude. Um, but I don't think there's like a base amount of research. I think some no more than your audience is probably going to be your best. I remember on the Dead Authors podcast, um, one I think it was the guy who was portraying, um, oh, was it Stevenson, Louis Stevenson, or the guy who wrote The Little Mermaid? Anyway, there's some like very famous Danish author. I think whoever wrote The Little Mermaid. And the actor got it like misread the Wikipedia summary and thought it said Dutch, and so did a Dutch accent and was talking about Amsterdam and talking about the Netherlands. And Paul F. Tompkins kept being like, "But yes, how? But your childhood in Denmark. Let's go back to Like was trying to clue the guy in that that he was Danish, not Dutch. Um, Actually, one of the performances that's absolutely beautiful and brutal and fascinating um, is Roald Dahl and Ben. Oh man, the voice of Sonic. um, the actor who plays Sonic, Ben Schwartz, does Roald Dahl, and is talking about Big Friendly Giant, James the Giant Peach, and blah blah blah, and Roald Dahl's anti-Semitism was like brought up, like and that was not an element that Ben Schwartz was aware of, and so like learning in real time, he's like, wait, I said that? Oh, that's not good. Hans Christian Andersen, thank you, Hans Christian Andersen. Um, but then like talking about like oh well, if I hope that if a young Jewish actor discovers that his hero said these horrible things, like like he would be able to situate it and blah blah blah, like it was just very like touching, kind of reconciling with it in the moment. And that's something that comes up when you're impersonating folks who have a really florid history like Lovecraft, right? How I talk about race as Lovecraft is a it's a fine line, right? Because I don't want to necessarily just like, I'm going to say all the things Lovecraft said about black people and Italians, because then it'll be just not watchable except by like Stormfront fans. But I also don't want to be like, hello, I'm H.P. Wolfcraft, and I reject all forms of racism, and now I'm going to do sweet kickflips on my skateboard. Like that doesn't feel honest to the character. I feel like I have a responsibility to like acknowledge Lovecraft's racism without like trying to whitewash it or excuse it. Like that's something just as a performer. Um, I try to be incredibly open and honest about Lovecraft's racial views. I've written an entire essay on it called "On Portraying a White Supremacist," and just the challenge of how you kind of can embody that and perform that honestly, while not centering it, because I don't think it's central to the performance. Um, no, but also without excusing it or valorizing it, right? Like I come not to praise Lovecraft. But I think there's things for me, Lovecraft, like my mission, what have you, my goal in portraying Lovecraft is portraying his humanity. It's portraying like just that he is not some sort of slavering monster, nor is he this like chiseled from marble, like intellectual, god of creativity. Like, he was part of an ecosystem of writers and an ecosystem of artists, and like, he benefited from that, and he, fed into that, but he was not some sort of, either figure cowering in his attic scribbling away about monsters, or, some solitary genius from whom like, the 20th century horror like sprang fully formed. He is a link in a chain, and he is part of a creative ecosystem. And I think that's incredibly useful for those of us creating art, right? To think about, how do we nourish the artists around us? How are we creating a sense of ecosystem and a sense of collaboration? And that's why something like the Forever Museum is a ton of fun, because it's a way for us to share our expertise and to connect with each other and learn from each other. And that's what life is all about. So there you go. All right. I think that's going to do it. Thank you, everyone, for being here, uh, for logging in, and hopefully I'll be able to record you and have you available for people to view. But yeah, for everyone out there, I'm Lehman Kessler. You can find more about me at lehmankessler.com if you're interested in supporting my work and my strangeness. I'm over at Patreon at Ask Lovecraft. And yeah, there you go. Thank you all so much. Hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day.